Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul. Tensions between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah have reached new heights in the wake of a deadly rocket attack in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, sparking fears over a wider conflict. Israel, attributing the attack to Hezbollah, says it's now mulling time and manner of its response. The attack has cut short Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's trip to the U.S., where he met with President Biden, Vice President Harris, and Republican presidential nominee Trump, with a focus on ceasefire talks and the future of the war in Gaza. With Harris looking poised to replace Biden, attention is also being drawn to where she stands on the war in Ukraine. U.S. presidential election and two wars. That's the topic of our discussion today. And joining us tonight is Professor Ban Kil-Joo at Korea University's Ilmin International Relations Institute. It's always great to have you with us.
Hello, good to be here.
And we also have Aidan Haher, reader in international relations at the University of Westminster, joining us from London. Always a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be back.
All right, Dr. Haher, let's start with you. Israel says it would strike hard against Hezbollah after the militant group's alleged rocket strike on a football pitch in Israel-controlled Golan Heights killed 12 people. Why have tensions moved to the Golan Heights, and how do you anticipate the level of Israel's response?
Well, the Golan Heights is technically part of Syria, but it has been occupied by Israel, first of all in 1967, following the Six-Day War between Israel and a coalition of Arab states. But then again in 1981, Israel moved into the Golan Heights and has annexed essentially this territory, which is very strategically important. It borders Israel, obviously, it's part of Syria, but it also borders Lebanon and Jordan. So to control that area gives any army a very keen strategic advantage. So Israel at the moment controls that, and Hezbollah has launched attacks there to try to essentially bring Israel into a conflict with its neighbors. This is something that Hezbollah would like to see happen. It would like to extend the war out beyond Gaza and would like to draw in the Syrians, the Lebanese and the Iranians ultimately to create a kind of an Arab coalition to fight against Israel. But the Israel's allies have, since the attack, the terrible attack on Sunday, have cautioned Israel to not be drawn into this particular conflict, because obviously they don't want to see a regional war spill out over Israel's borders. This would be something which would be catastrophic for the region, and it would bring in the great powers possibly into conflict with each other. So it's certainly something that they will be putting great pressure on Israel to respond, but not to respond in a heavy-handed fashion.
Well, according to a Reuters report, Israeli drone strike in southern Lebanon killed 2 people today, including a child, in the first deadly Israeli strike on Lebanon since the Golan Heights attack. And as you pointed out, world leaders and many others are trying to dissuade Israel from increasing attacks on Lebanon, but fears are growing over a wider conflict, which brings us to our next question, Professor Ban. Do you believe there's now a higher chance of the Israel-Hezbollah conflict escalating into a full-scale war? And what would that mean to the world?
Well, as you pointed out earlier, Israel attacked southern Lebanon as part of the countermeasures to Hezbollah's attack on the Golan Heights. This attack is defined as self-defense. Moreover, without the eligible countermeasures, it might fail to seize the initiative of the Israel-Hamas war as well as the Israel-Hezbollah conflict. In this sense, war escalation is more expected than before at the moment. What it means is that the Middle East conflict is going to be wider in terms of area and stronger in terms of intensity, which poses a greater challenge to international stability. But at the same time, I don't think that this incident directly leads to a full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah for 2 reasons. First, Hezbollah has no intention to make this conflict wider, at least for the moment. Hezbollah denied its attack on the Golan Heights, although Israel confirmed that rockets belong to the Hezbollah. this ambiguous situation is most likely to make the international society push Israel harder to exercise restraint. So under this mechanism, Israel might choose the option of a limited retaliation like the attack on southern Lebanon rather than a massive retaliation, which can lead to a full-scale war. Second, conducting two wars simultaneously is not an easy task even for great powers. Meanwhile, Israel is not a great power, but a middle power. If Israel determines to go to a full-scale war with Hezbollah, its goal should be logically with a complete destruction of Hezbollah, similar to its war aims with Hamas. On 25 July 2024, Netanyahu reconfirmed that a complete triumph through the destruction of Hamas should obviously be the goal of the war in his speech before the joint session of the U.S. Congress. Achieving these goals on the two front lines is extremely hard. In this regard, a full-scale war is not a rationally calculated option. When the above factors are taken into consideration, Israel might not rush to a full-scale war. To put it another way, Netanyahu is most likely to make counterattacks in an unprecedented way as he promised if he attempts another attack, but it is expected to be made not in the way of a full-scale war. However, it remains to be seen how long crisis management would work and restraint is going to be exercised in order not to escalate.
So we'll see attacks grow in intensity, but it's unlikely to develop into a full-scale war, and we'll instead see limited retaliation from Israel. And staying with you, Professor Ban, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was on a high-profile visit to the U.S. when the rocket strike in Golan Heights occurred. He met with President Joe Biden and likely Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris, focusing on ceasefire talks. What's your analysis of the outcome? And how would the Israel-Hezbollah tensions affect ceasefire efforts?
To be honest, I have to say that the outcome is mixed on Netanyahu's visit to the United States. Netanyahu delivered the message that he wanted to make, not only through meetings with Biden, Harris, and Trump, but also before joint session of the U.S. Congress, as I pointed out earlier. Biden and Harris also sent a strong signal to him regarding the ceasefire efforts. Meanwhile, the timing would have some role to play in expediting the ceasefire efforts for the two front lines against Hamas and Hezbollah, because American politics face a game-changing mechanism. The current U.S. administration continues to ask Netanyahu to expedite the ceasefire negotiation. Not only the incumbent Biden, but also the most likely Democratic candidate Harris is concerned about the Middle Eastern conflicts and the humanitarian crisis over there. In particular, Netanyahu visited the United States at a moment when Harris, the replacement of Biden, rose to the main stage of the U.S. presidential race. So this moment was helpful for Netanyahu to speed up diplomatic activities in the United States. This also might serve as a great opportunity for Harris to show her diplomatic capacity and clarify her diplomatic stance in a situation where her diplomatic ability has not been tested and remains her weakest area. Having said that, Harris tried to send a strong signal to Netanyahu in two ways. First, she was intentionally absent from Netanyahu's Congress speech. This absence is intended to show to the domestic audience as well as Netanyahu that she can be a strong leader in the area of diplomacy as well. Second, Harris met Netanyahu and asked to expedite the negotiation efforts and make the ceasefire deal as soon as possible. In particular, she mentioned that she will not be in silence regarding the humanitarian crisis and disaster in Gaza. This remark is intended to show that she continues the Biden administration's posture to Israel, but at the same time, she could be more assertive to push Israel to do more. Her request helps Israel expedite the ceasefire efforts. Simultaneously, her diplomatic stance and her meeting with Netanyahu served as a golden opportunity to show her diplomatic ability, which means it would be helpful for the presidential race. Meanwhile, one thing that needs to be paid attention to is Trump variable. Netanyahu's visit to the United States served as an arena for Israel to be continuously supported by the United States. In particular, Netanyahu visited Mar-a-Lago and Trump warmly welcomed him. Unlike Biden, Trump remains a full supporter of Netanyahu without even raising the humanitarian issue. Moreover, Trump has been gaining momentum in the presidential election due to a dramatic story regarding an assassination attempt. In this sense, Netanyahu appears to have achieved diplomatic outcomes, which makes the U.S. continue its support for Israel. Trump also benefited from Netanyahu's visit to his place because a group of Israelis in the U.S. could be more cohesive to support Trump in the presidential election.
Harris let the Israeli leader know that she would not remain silent in the face of Palestinian suffering, making a stronger voice than Biden over the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Looks like she'll place a greater focus on human rights, though it's unlikely that she'll chart an entirely new path on the war in Gaza, perhaps because, as you mentioned, Professor Ban, because diplomacy may be one of her weakest domains. And we'll talk more about Netanyahu's talks with Trump as we move on. But before that, Dr. Haher, Netanyahu addressed the U.S. Congress, where he was cheered by Republicans while many Democrats boycotted his address. Now, Professor Ban briefly touched upon this, but what are the key takeaways from his speech, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I think for anybody who's paid close attention to what's been happening in Gaza since October, to see Netanyahu being cheered and receiving a standing ovation makes one feel quite sick. This is somebody who has implemented a military strategy in Gaza, which is designed to kill civilians, which is designed to break international law, which is designed to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing and ultimately genocide. And this is somebody who shouldn't be celebrated. This is somebody who should be in jail. This is somebody who was also deeply unpopular within Israel. So this curious spectacle of the American conservative right championing this war criminal sends us a message around the world that America's power, America's status, America's credibility as a bastion of values is now dead. You know, and as much as Kamala Harris appears to be less supportive of Israel than Biden, she has nonetheless met with Netanyahu, shook hands with him. And these are images that I think, will come back to haunt the United States. And it certainly sends the wrong signal internationally. At a moment when the international community is revulsed by what the Israeli army is doing, this really is an extraordinary moment, and one which I think will haunt the United States for many, many years to come.
And Dr. Haher, Netanyahu also met with Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump, facing a delicate balancing act amid uncertainties of Israel's next partner in the White House. What's your take on their meeting, and what would U.S. Middle East policy look like under Trump's presidency?
Well, Netanyahu and Trump have clashed in the last few years. Trump was very annoyed that Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden after he won the 2020 U.S. elections. But I think it would be difficult to find two more craven megalomaniacs in the world today than Netanyahu and Donald Trump. These are two political leaders who have demonstrated that their only real aim in politics is to look after themselves, albeit in very different ways. Netanyahu's campaign in the Gaza has been designed to keep him in power. There has been many opportunities to stop this violence, but he wants to continue this campaign to ensure that he continues to stay in power. Likewise, Trump has demonstrated in the past that his only aim politically is to feather his own nest, to maintain his own position of power. Now, in terms of what will happen under a Trump administration in the Middle East, really, it's almost impossible to tell because Trump is essentially deranged. You know, he's what he thinks today will be something completely to what he thinks tomorrow. The previous Trump presidency, I think many people were terrified before it began, but at the end of it, you know, he had only really used force, I think, once against Syria and once against Iran. So his actual, you know, use of force wasn't very frequent, which was a surprise to many people. One would hope that if he did get elected, which I think everybody in the world outside of the United States hopes he doesn't get elected, but if he does, you would have to hope that, again, he would show the same degree of caution. But as I said, he is a man who is capable of changing his mind depending on what he happens to see on Fox News. So it's very difficult to judge, you know, long term what his foreign policy would be.
All right. Now, moving on to the war in Ukraine, Professor Ban, considerable attention is being drawn to Harris, who is looking poised to replace Biden as the Democratic Party nominee. What could Harris's presidency mean for the war in Ukraine, and how would her Ukraine policy differ from Trump's?
Well, before we go for a deep dive, we need to take a look at how Harris and Trump have a different view on international politics. First, they have a different view on a liberal international order. Harris is most likely eager to preserve a liberal international order like Biden, but Trump does not care to preserve a liberal international order or a rules-based order. Second, they have a different view on the causation logic of managing alliances. Harris believes that allies are great assets for the United States, but Trump maintains that allies are free riders, which are bad for American interests. The former believes that alliances are independent variable for seeking U.S. interests around the world. The latter notes American interests should be independent variable on how to deal with allies. This is the very logic of the spirit of MAGA, Make America Great Again. Furthermore, this MAGA posture is based on the transactional approach. These two differences allow us to tell the difference between Harris and Trump on the war in Ukraine. The Harris camp thinks that if Russia, an invader, wins the war, a rules-based order will be at greater stake. So Harris believes that the United States, as a status quo power and a hegemon, needs to put more effort into helping Ukraine for the current order not to collapse. To that end, the Harris camp is most likely to think the United States needs not simply to continue military assistance to Ukraine, but also to enhance the assistance for Ukraine. In short, helping Ukraine defeat an invader matters to freedom around the world. Likewise, how to end the war matters for the direction of the international order. In contrast, Trump believes that the United States assistance to Ukraine has no gains, judging from the transactional approach. So according to Trump, the money spent on external war was supposed to be used for the United States' own internal interests. To that end, the Trump camp believes that the war should be stopped right away. As a matter of fact, Trump said that he could terminate the war within 24 hours. How to end the war or who wins the war does not matter to the Trump side. In this regard, Trump believes that stopping the military assistance makes the ceasefire easier and faster. Basically, the transactional approach makes the United States focus more on short-term gains, and it is short-sighted. However, Trump believes that the immediate ceasefire is in line with the transactional approach, and it is relevant for American interests.
Meanwhile, Dr. Heyer, Ukraine is stepping up its engagement with China. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba visited China last week to hold talks with his Chinese counterpart for the first time since the Russian invasion. What's behind this, and how do you see the outcome?
Well, I think it highlights that Ukraine is becoming increasingly desperate. The war isn't proceeding according to plan, as much as they've been able to stall Russian advances for a long period. They are not pushing back against Russian encroachment. And of course, they're very worried now that with the potential of a Trump presidency and divisions within Europe itself regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that they may well find themselves in a much worse position in 6 to 12 months' time. So naturally, they're trying to explore every avenue. China has demonstrated that it is supportive of Russia on many issues, but there is, a degree of difference between Russia and China's perspective when it comes to the use of force. China is essentially always against the use of force unless it's sanctioned by the UN Security Council. That has always been its position. In this particular instance, obviously, Russia did not have Security Council permission to invade Ukraine. So China's position would be that it values sovereignty, it values a very conservative understanding of international law and a preference for order internationally, and it would see the invasion of Ukraine as a threat to that order and a threat, and one which could ultimately impact on China's economy as well. So it is not as much of a supporter of Russia in this particular instance as one might imagine, and there is a potential there for Ukraine to be able to negotiate some sort of agreement with China relating to Ukraine's sovereignty, which would enable Ukraine in the future to leverage that agreement with China in any future negotiations regarding Ukraine's territorial integrity.
Ukrainian foreign minister wasn't the only high-ranking guest to visit China in recent days. Foreign Minister Wang Yi also hosted delegates from Palestine, concluding talks with a declaration on ending division. Professor Ban, what is China aiming for?
Well, China's active approach to reaching out to Ukraine and Palestine is defined as a significant change from a prior strategic ambiguity with a low profile to a more visible approach with clarity. If so, what makes Beijing to change its strategic posture? There are three reasons behind this change. First of all, instability creates an opportunity. We live in a world where an international vacuum means international instability. Both international politics and domestic politics are at stake at the same time. The United States is declining in the world in terms of its capability. To top it off, the United States might be less willing to make the international system stable when Trump returns to the White House. So two traps are rising simultaneously. The first trap is the Thucydides trap, where the war between a status quo United States and a revisionist China might be inevitable. The second trap is the Hindenburg trap, where the United States, as an incumbent hegemonic power, is reluctant to serve as a responsible role for international stability, leading to international disaster. As Trump is gaining pace in the presidential race, these two traps are expected to be bolstered. These bolstering two traps and power vacuum serve as a valuable opportunity for China to fill this power gap. In this vein, Ukraine and Palestine are optimal targets for Beijing to pursue this vacuum-filling strategy. Second, the power redistribution spurs this change. The power redistribution within the revisionist league encourages China to transform its strategic posture from passivity to activity. In June 2024, North Korea and Russia signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty. This new alliance between DPRK and Russia made China not only estranged from North Korea, but also unpleasant. To top it off, this new architecture led to the weakening of China's top status as the revisionist league. Meanwhile, reaching out to Ukraine and Palestine could be intended to revive its status as a leading player in tackling international problems. Third, China wants to be seen differently by the international society. Beijing intended to show to the world China is different from rules-breaking states like Russia and North Korea, which take advantage of the new corridor mechanism for maximizing their interest. Inviting Ukraine from a foreign minister during the war with Russia and hosting a Palestinian group meeting during the war with Israel could help China be seen as a responsible stakeholder, unlike Russia. Beijing expects that this diplomatic expansion could help weaken a negative image of China as well. So all in all, China's diplomatic posture to reach out to Ukraine and Palestine is the result of tremendous efforts to find some opportunity from international crisis and the chaotic American politics.
It appears China is framing itself as a productive player and mediator of global conflicts and possibly an alternative broker to the United States. Well, another important point to keep close tabs on. We'll leave it there tonight. Thank you, Professor Ban, as always, for sharing your perspectives.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, Dr. Haher. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.